Hello and welcome everyone to the Heal Yourself, Heal the Earth Global Online Conference, where you will receive inspiration and practical tools to deepen into your path of personal and planetary healing. I am your host for this event, Monique Challis, and today I'm really thrilled to be speaking with Alan Booker. Alan is an engineer, educator, and author with over 20 years experience in sustainable and regenerative design. He is the creator of Biocompatible Design, a set of standards for creating products and projects that are deeply compatible with the Earth's biosphere. So welcome, Alan. Thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you. It's good to be with you.
And the title of Alan's talk is Repairing the Infrastructure of Civilization Using Biocompatible Design. Wow, that sounds fantastic. So I wonder if we could begin with you briefly just telling us a little bit about your own story and your background as an engineer.
Sure. I got my degree in electrical engineering back a good while back, and went into the industry, have been a systems engineer, systems architect for about 30 years, working on a variety of things, computer technologies, internet technologies. And, as I kind of got into that, engineers kind of being problem solvers and thinking about problems and how we work with them and so forth, I really started to realize the degree of damage that a lot of our engineering and design practices were having, how much damage they were creating to the biosphere, and also how damaging they were to the humans that were using them. And so, about 10 years into my engineering career, I started looking around and thinking about it a lot and trying to figure out how we were going to solve some of these issues going forward. It kind of became increasingly obvious to me that we couldn't do what we were doing forever.
Right.
And we're depleting a lot of resources. We're creating a lot of damage. We can't do this forever. How are we going to fix it? How are we going to address it? And so I started going around looking for solutions. And one of the first groups I alighted on were the permaculture designers,
Right.
because they were one of the groups I found that actually had workable examples of solutions on the ground that I could go see. And I was really interested in folks that had not just like theoretical approaches, but practical working examples. Engineers tend to be kind of practical because at the end of the day, we've got to create things that work. And so I was like, I want to find a group of folks that is really doing it. And the permaculturists were sort of the ones that I found that were doing it the most widely. They had examples on, in many, many different biospheres, many different biomes. And so I got a hold of Bill Mollison's Permaculture Designer's Manual and went to work and read the whole thing, got my permaculture design certification, and then started studying a lot of other fields of sustainable and regenerative design, and started teaching and consulting in that field. And then I've just kind of been going down that road ever since. And that's sort of like how I arrived at thinking about how do we take professional level designers and get them to do something better than we have been doing, something that's going to be more sustainable, more regenerative, and more healing. And that's kind of really what I'm working on today.
Wow, thank you. That sounds great. So can you tell us what is biocompatible design? Can you go into that? I know you have some slides you wanted to share.
Sure, I'll go ahead and let me kind of pull up some slides here. And hopefully you'll see those here.
Yes, I can see them.
Very good. So let me just kind of like go ahead and jump on into it. I will go through these slides, and then just hopefully we'll just have a great conversation as we go here.
Okay.
So get things set up, and here we go. All right. So, as I thought about it, it became more and more obvious that yes, we have to have technology and human infrastructure that's non-polluting, that is regenerative, And by the way, I do use the word regenerative, and you'll notice that a lot of people who have been in this field for a while are moving away from the word sustainable, and they're moving towards the word regenerative.
Right.
And the reason for that is that, if you aim for sustainable, all you're kind of doing is you're aiming for, let's not do more damage.
Yeah, let's sustain what we've been doing.
Right.
And that's not enough anymore.
Not enough. Well, I mean, okay, so the idea is it recognizes we're doing a lot of damage, and it kind of says, let's just stop doing damage.
Right.
And the challenge with that, the more I've studied like complex ecosystems, is that ecosystems, they're never static. They're always moving and evolving. And if what you do is you aim as a designer at just keeping from doing more damage, then typically what you'll do is your ecosystems will slowly degrade because you're just trying to hold them static, and it doesn't work.
Exactly.
Ecosystems and nature aren't like that. They're always growing in some direction, And so what the idea of regenerative is, it basically says we need to create systems that are so dynamic and fertile and working with the cycles of nature that they regenerate. They increase in fertility, they increase in productivity, they increase in health over time, which is what natural ecosystems want to do when they're well regulated. So, okay, we need regenerative technology, not just sustainable. And very importantly, we want technologies that are capable of creating an overall environment that will sustain happy, healthy people on a healthy earth, that has a healthy biosphere around us. Because another part of biocompatible design is taking and moving past the idea of humans as somehow separate from the rest of the biome that they live in, and moving back towards an idea, even from an engineering and design perspective, that human beings are an integral part of the overall landscape that they live in, that they are one species among many and can be very great neighbors to all of the other species. As a matter of fact, we have to partner with all of the living systems of Earth if we're going to be optimally healthy. And that used to be something that was asserted by healers and people who intuitively knew it.
Right.
And today we have so much very strong science that is now also agreeing with that it's becoming something that I can openly say to a room full of engineers, scientists, architects, urban planners, and so forth. It's no longer a controversial statement, really, because we now understand that at a really deep level. Science is backing it up. And so now we're really starting to have good conversations about how do we do it? How do we get there?
Right. Oh, that's wonderful. That's really good to hear that, it's accepted now.
Right. What we ended up doing was we started out back a while back with this idea that the way we made everybody's quality of life better was to basically figure out ways of using more and more of the Earth's resources so that everybody could have more, right? More and more. And so the design approach that we came up with was just this idea of, if we can give everybody more stuff, then it's gonna raise their standard of living. And that was kind of an idea that was thrown out there. People, if we give them the ability to get more stuff, then it'll sort itself out, right? Everybody can get more stuff. There was an old statement that a rising tide lifts all ships.
Oh.
Which was the idea that if we just have economic growth, we consume more and everything, that all people will be, raised up in their standard of living. Well, I think if you study the history of it, you realize that didn't work out.
No.
All it did was it created more inequity, and
Yes.
at the exact same time, it got people into the mindset of consumption.
Mhm.
And it ended up with, well, things like this picture that I'm showing here, which is what people jokingly call a McMansion,
Yeah.
right? And this has turned out to be sort of a dead end. It does not create happy, healthy people, but it does certainly create a huge amount of consumption that's destructive to the ecosystem, isolating to people. People end up feeling socially isolated, and furthermore, we ended up where we have a lot of things in the market today. They're designed the way they are because it's cheap and easy to build, not because it was thought about from the foundation of what is best to create happy, healthy people and a rich ecosystem for them to live in.
Right.
So it's like we got to reassess our design criteria. I would say that as an engineer, right? When we sit down to design anything, we have a set of design criteria, we call design requirements document. Here are the requirements for what you're going to build. And it has a whole list of things we gotta do. But somehow or another, on those lists, we've never had the people that are using this have to be happy and healthy.
Right.
The ecosystem that it works in has to be made healthier and more robust and more resilient because of this product or this project or the process you're designing or whatever. And so that's never been on the list of requirements that I as an engineer have been given while working in the industry.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That no one thought to make it compatible with life. And you hear about sick building syndrome, and
oh yes,
some buildings are really unpleasant to be in.
Some buildings will actively make you very ill. And a lot of the tools that we have created will create all kinds of pathologies.
Okay.
We keep on, as a professional, I have to have one of these things, with my smartphone,
Okay.
right, to communicate and so on and so forth, because of but boy, these things were definitely created without thinking through the implications of what they do and to human beings, who use them constantly.
What evidence? Do you have any evidence to?
Oh, there's now, I mean, boy, we could probably give several hundred studies that are out there. As a matter of fact, you can go out and use, if you want peer-reviewed science for any of these, go use a tool like Google Scholar and just type it in, and lists of dozens and dozens of peer-reviewed papers now that are looking at the results of using these tools. They'll pop up for you, and you can go in and look at, and I kind of want to move towards solutions, so I don't want to dwell too much on all the problems that we're causing, but
because we know about those. So let's go towards the solution.
We live with those every day, so I think we're kind of thinking, how do we go forward from here, right?
Right.
So my thought is we need to start creating human systems that are designed to be optimally compatible with what people actually need, instead of just driving more consumption. And so as I started thinking about that, and thinking about the fact that engineers, architects, urban planners, all of the people who design the infrastructure that's around us every day, they all work off of design requirements.
Okay.
And if these kinds of requirements aren't on their list, it's not going to get addressed. So as I've been thinking about my bigger picture approach of integrated regenerative design, which is a way of teaching engineering teams and design teams of people that will be working together to create the infrastructure of civilization, I was like, all right, I'm going to be using tools like permaculture design to show them how to think about designing resilient systems and regenerative systems. We're going to be using holistic decision making. We have a whole suite of tools, but one of the pieces of that needs to be a set of design requirements, a set of principles and guidelines, design guidelines, that explain to them how to think about their design to create these kinds of outcomes. And I thought, what do I call that? And eventually, I came down to calling that biocompatible design. Mm-hmm. And, so I kind of defined that as design that nurtures and supports life in all its forms. It creates vibrant and healthy ecosystems for us and all of Earth's other residents to inhabit. And that acknowledges that humans are part of nature and we can't be healthy if our ecosystems aren't healthy, right?
True.
So it was like, how do we put this all together and create this set of standards? Okay. And so I thought about it, and I've worked on it now and looked at a lot of science for about 2 years, and used all my background in engineering, in nature connection, in regenerative design and permaculture and so forth, and have gone through a couple of years of research as I've created the integrated regenerative design framework to also create this set of standards that I'm calling biocompatible design. And this is a little graphic that I put together just to give the big picture of biocompatible design. And so, like, the audience that's listening will kind of have a idea of where we are on the project. I am, right now as we're speaking, a little bit before this will air, I am just starting a peer review process with a lot of other permaculture designers, engineers, scientists, architects, medical professionals, to look at this set of standards I've been developing. So what I'm showing you today is sort of a preview. It's about to go into peer review. So we'll probably improve it and deepen it a little bit as we continue that peer review process. But this is sort of a sneak peek for everybody.
Yeah, fantastic.
At where I am right now in the creation of the biocompatible design standards.
So we have human factors, ecological factors, and technological factors. You've got your three categories there.
So as I started looking at it, I started coming up with this just list of all these different principles. Right. And I realized they started sorting themselves out into these three basic categories. Ecological factors, which is how the technologies and systems and infrastructure that we're building interact with the surrounding ecosystem. Technological factors, which is what are the characteristics that the technology itself needs to have in order to fit into the ecosystem and work properly. And then human factors is when we design a piece of technology or a whole set of infrastructure to surround us, how does it affect human beings? What does it do to us as we use it? Right? So it was kind of these three different categories that they sort of sorted themselves into. And then as I continued to work on it, without really trying, it sort of came out that I had 7 principles in each one.
Oh, nice.
So I didn't really start off trying that, but that's where it ended up and where I am today. Now, who knows? It may change a little bit as we do peer review. We're open to change. But I went ahead and did this graphic just to show that biocompatible design, and that's the little one form of the logo there in the center, kind of branches out into these 3 major categories, and then each one of those has 7 different principles to it.
Okay.
And so what I'd like to do is just give a very high level overview of the principles real quickly, just to kind of walk through them. And boy, we could, eventually this is going to be a multi-week deep dive class for design professionals.
Okay.
So there's a lot to go into here, but this will maybe help everybody to start thinking about how do we design technologies that do all these things. So maybe let's just kind of walk through and look at the principles real quick.
Okay.
So as we said, ecological factors, technological factors, human factors, 21 design principles, and each one of those design principles has a set of guidelines underneath it. We're not going to get into those today because those get very particular. Those are particular guidelines to tell engineers and architects and so forth exactly what to do. How to implement each of these strategies. In ecological factors, basically what I realized was we've got to figure out our land use first. We have just taken over and not thought about, is there place on the land for all different inhabitants of the earth to live? We've just basically said, we will mow down everything in our way and not consider how much unbroken habitat there is for all of the ecological systems that really support us and give us all of the things that we need to also be healthy.
Exactly.
So it's like we need to start off by addressing land use. How do we create an ecological balance of land use? And then once we do that, all the technologies that we put out there on the landscape need to think about water and soil and air and climate. So the next three ecological factors on the list are that: water, soil, and air. And so we look at how do we practice ecological water management, how do we create, right now our agricultural practices and our building practices are depleting our soil. And all the scientists are looking at it are telling us if we don't stop this, we will have a crisis in soil and the availability of soil by about 2035, which is only about 15 years from now. We're really headed there. And of course, climate has been, and air quality has been a huge discussion. So I think all people are familiar with that. Mm. So those are the next three factors. And then you go looking at it and say, okay, if we've thought about how we're using our land, we've thought about how to restore hydrology, water, soil, and air, then the bottom of everything in life is what's called primary producers. Those are trees, phytoplanktons, algae, the photosynthesizers that basically create the foundation for all the rest of life on the earth. And there's a bunch of things we need to be doing to make certain that we are nurturing and regenerating them. The next layer up is the microbiomes. All of the bacteria, the fungi, all the microorganisms that actually are symbiotic with the plants, but they're also symbiotic with us. We're starting to realize that the microbiome in our gut and in our mouth and on our skin, if that's not healthy, we aren't healthy. And so we need to make certain that everything that we're doing technologically is nurturing and regenerating healthy microbiomes in all the ecosystems. Because we cannot have healthy biomes without a healthy microbiome. And there was a really interesting a bit of research that came out, was published just a couple weeks ago, in which a group of researchers in Hawaii realized that microbiomes nest inside of each other. Oh. That the whole ecosystem you live in has what they call an ecosystem microbiome. And that all of the microbiomes, the sub-microbiomes inside of that, like our gut microbiome or skin, literally are nested inside of that. And if that ecosystem microbiome is sick, then it becomes almost impossible for our microbiomes to be healthy.
Wow.
So if the microbiome in the building that you're living in is not healthy, then it becomes very difficult for you to maintain gut health and everything else. So we start looking at, in this particular set of guidelines, how to maintain healthy microbiomes in buildings and in ecosystems and so forth. And then the last one under ecological factors is nurture and regenerate all the trophic layers. The trophic layers are the food chain. So now that we've got our photosynthesizers there, we've got our microbiome. Now we start looking at all of the other things all the way up to the top keystone species, the top predators in our ecosystems, making certain that our ecosystems from top to bottom are functional. And that is what we have to have in order to have biocompatible design addressing all the ecological factors that need to be there for us to be healthy, for the earth to be healthy around us.
Right. And do we know how to achieve these goals?
Absolutely.
We have all the tools.
We
just
have all the
done it
tools.
before.
That's a great question, because I run into over and over again, I run into young folks that are maybe just about college age. They're coming out of high school, they're getting into college. They're thinking about kind of, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? And a lot of them have sort of an intuitive sense of how much damage we're doing. And they've heard two different stories. One is, we can't do anything about it. Right. So don't worry. I mean, just, we're headed down this path of destruction, and there's nothing we can do about it. And then there's another side to it that I think is also destructive, and it's something that a certain subsection of sort of the environmentalists have pushed, which is like, oh, human beings are inherently destructive, and the best thing that we could do for the earth is all just kind of die, Yes. It's like, if we all just died and went away, that the earth would be so much better off.
Yes.
And as soon as I hear that, I said, no, I don't agree with either of those. What I have come to understand through about 20 years of studying this and studying regenerative design is that human beings are a keystone species on the planet. That we, just as we can be profoundly destructive, we can also be profoundly restorative and regenerative. We have now done enough damage on the planet that if we all just went away, that it would take a very long time for the ecosystems to recover to to full health. Right. On the other hand, if we decided to step up and take on our role as a keystone species and be deeply regenerative, it might take us 100 years to fully repair all the damage we've done, but we could, by and large, reverse the damage and create extremely rich and biodiverse environments that are extremely healthy for us and all of the rest of Earth's inhabitants. I think we now have that responsibility because we have created so much destruction.
Yes. Yeah.
The tools are all there. We know what the tools are. I think it really turns out to be actually more of a question of storytelling. Do we as human beings tell each other stories that allow us as a culture to move in that direction?
Right.
Because every time I analyze this, I come down to it and go, no, I got the tools. If we were willing to implement the tools, we can do this. It's a matter of things like political will.
Oh, yeah.
But political will, we can't foist it off on the politicians because, several people have told me who've been deep into all this, that politicians cannot get too far ahead of what the people are demanding as a body.
Yes. I've had a politician say to me, I said, why are you not, I'm just going off on a tangent.
Yes.
Why, we need to ban single-use plastics. We need to, and he said, we need more public pressure. You need to,
yes.
I said, okay, I'll organize that.
That's right. And that's it. There are some politicians that really aren't concerned about this yet. There's other politicians that know this very, very well, but they also know that they cannot get too far ahead of what people are demanding.
Right.
And so we kind of get down to this whole question of, can we tell this story and get people very excited about the fact that we know how to solve these problems and that we can live in a much more healthy and rich environment if we move in this direction, right?
Right. Well, that's what you're bringing. So thank you so much. And
yes.
thank you for addressing that about, you know, the two extremes, and neither one, like, I always think of it as nature doesn't make mistakes like that. Nature didn't create us to then, you know, say we were a mistake. And we're meant to be the stewards. We are nature. We are integral.
Yes.
So I love that you're bringing that forward. So thank you so much for addressing that, because I completely.
Yes, well, thank you. I'm just going to go really quickly now through technological factors, because this is where it gets kind of technical, and we'll come back to this in a few minutes, just kind of like talking about some practical things that people can do and be thinking about. But I realized that the very first thing under technological factors is that a lot of our technologies have kind of been designed where they try to power over natural ecosystems. Instead of working with nature, we have a saying in permaculture. It says, work with nature, not against it. And so it's kind of easy if you have a lot of energy at your disposal, which fossil fuels gives us a lot of high density energy as designers. It's just easy to go, oh, you know, I don't want all the complexity of dealing with natural ecosystems. I just want to create my own thing that just uses power and energy to be able to overpower anything that the natural ecosystem is doing. So if I want to take a building and isolate it from the world around it and use a huge amount of energy to keep it at 72 degrees Fahrenheit year round, I can do that. And I'll burn a huge amount of energy to do it, but, you know, I will use exactly the same building technologies in, say, Phoenix, Arizona, where it gets to be, you know, in 110 degrees and plus. I'll use the exact same building technologies I do there as I do, say, in Maine, or in Montana, where the climate is radically different, or in southern Florida. And I'll just build them all the same way, and I'll put air conditioners in them, and I'll use a huge amount of energy to just completely power over the environment. And it creates these little isolational bubbles that we live in that disconnect us from the earth, that create all kinds of health issues, and that are not adaptive to place and mutually symbiotic with nature. So the very first idea under technological factors is that we need to start creating technologies that are mutually symbiotic with nature, that adapt to and work with the natural ecosystem. As soon as we go there, we realize we have to build at the proper scale, and something we call human scale is involved in that. We need to use biocompatible materials and processes. Right now, we keep on introducing tens of thousands of chemicals, artificial and synthetic chemicals, which we really don't test to understand what they do to us. So we need to use biocompatible materials and processes. We need to practice closed cycle design, which basically means instead of extracting things from the earth, using it once and then throwing it into a landfill, we need to go to something next thing people think about is recycling. But the problem with thinking about recycling is that it's one step better, which is extract it, use it, recycle it maybe once or twice, and then throw it in a landfill. So what we really need to do is think about when we extract a limited resource from nature, we need to do what's called closed cycle. If we take something of a high value, like a metal from the earth, we need to design from the ground up all of our technologies so that that becomes what we call a technological nutrient. And it goes and is used over and over and over again in a way that is the same way nature reuses its nutrients.
Right, yeah.
Our technological ecosystem has to reuse nutrients. And there's been a lot of work on this out of the cradle to cradle folks and the closed cycle design folks, but we need to integrate this into this larger set of ideas so that we get away from creating waste.
Yes, there's no such thing.
Right.
The problem is the solution.
Yes. As I've taught some civil engineers, for example, civil engineers have a class in landfills.
Wow.
It's a whole class in how to do landfills, how to actually design a landfill so that when we throw all this stuff in there, it starts to create methane because it's anaerobic digestion. It starts to create methane. It's like, how do you create a landfill that doesn't leach toxic stuff into the groundwater and also doesn't decide to explode or catch fire because of all the methane coming off of it?
Right.
And so one of the students I was working with, he was in his class on landfills. So I said, go tell your civil engineering professor that I said that the fact that we have landfills is fundamental proof that our design science is broken.
Right.
So yes, we need to create closed cycle design, therefore having no waste, and basically making landfills, well, just, getting rid of them.
Exactly.
And then the last three things under technological factors have to do with sound, light, and electromagnetic fields. So we need to create a healthy and ecological soundscape. It turns out that sound pollution is profoundly negative impact on us and on nature. Light pollution, same thing. And a lot of our modern technologies have not been thinking about electromagnetic fields and radiation, electromagnetic radiation, and also ionizing radiation. Now, I'm going to come back to that in just a few minutes.
Okay.
Okay. And so let's go ahead now and jump on into human factors. And I think probably given the audience we're talking to today, a lot of people, these things will probably be fairly intuitive. But what I'm pointing out is we have to think about this as we're designing our technology and our infrastructure we're going to live in. And the first thing is create environments that connect people to their local biosphere. Because so much of our technology today has been disconnected. It's been having us live in these little bubbles of buildings and cars and so forth, in which we're not connected to the biosphere. And if we don't connect people to the natural environment around them, they won't actually be healthy. They won't be happy. This connection from nature has, now there's a huge amount of research showing how profoundly psychologically and emotionally destructive that is.
Yes.
Right? We need to provide bioappropriate external stimulation. We'll come back to that one in just a minute as well and dig into that, because that's another one that people can be thinking about for themselves. We need to design to encourage movement and engagement. So much of our design has been around the idea of making people comfortable. And it turns out that if you design only to maximize comfort, that's a very bad design pattern. That comes back to providing bioappropriate external stimulation. We need to create environments that are low stress and time rich. So many of our environments that are created by modern technology are rushed and they have chronic stressors. And so we need to be thinking about how to eliminate chronic stress and this feeling of constantly being rushed.
Yes.
And then the last two are to design to provide meaningful work and right livelihood, and to preserve the distinctiveness, the dignity, the sovereignty, and privacy of individuals and communities. This set of requirements are all about the technology themselves. So there's a lot of other things we could get into about how to create healthy culture, right? So these last two are all about how to make certain that the technology that we are creating actually sort of creates a foundation on which we can build a healthy culture.
Right.
If people don't have meaningful work and a right livelihood, you can't build a culture up from there.
No.
And if we have technologies that take away homogenized communities, so that the people's culture is taken away from them and homogenized out, that the dignity of their culture is marginalized, that their sovereignty is taken away and moved other places, and that their privacy is undermined by surveillance technologies and so forth, so that there's this chilling effect when you have surveillance and you're in a surveillance culture.
Right.
And so if we don't address these issues as foundational to our technologies, and we create technologies, especially information system technologies, that are surveillance oriented, that take away all of the distinctiveness and dignity and sovereignty of communities, then boy, we're just going to continue to degrade our culture and make it more and more impossible for the people who are thinking about culture repair to do their work.
Yes.
So there we go. Those are the 21 principles.
Fantastic. Is there any building anywhere that was designed along these principles?
Not yet. I'm hoping to go there. The closest set of standards for designing a building, that's actually a great question. Let me back up and kind of make a comment here. There are different sets of standards for different applications that try to address certain parts of this. So, for example, there's a great group called the International Living Futures Institute that has a thing called the Living Building Challenge.
Okay.
And they have tried to take and create a set of requirements for creating buildings that go a lot farther than anybody else have. And they really have. They've gone farther than just about anybody else. I noticed as I've been reviewing and working through and working with them a little bit, that they are addressing about 7 of these 21 principles. And as a result, they probably addressed more and in more depth than anybody else with their Living Building Challenge. But there's still a lot that they have not explicitly addressed. What I realized was that there's a lot of people who've done particular certifications and particular standards, like the Cradle to Cradle folks and their circular design. They've done great work. We should leverage that and say, hey, these people have a lot of expertise in this particular area, and they've written standards and done a lot of research, so we won't try to reinvent that. We can incorporate that into this bigger picture. What I'm trying to do, since I've had so much background as a systems engineer and systems architect thinking whole systems design, is try to identify the whole set in a very concise and coherent way of explaining it so that we can address all of it, right?
Yeah.
And so, I'm actually working with some folks on a Living Building Challenge building right now, and thinking about adding a few of the biocompatible design elements to it, because they're interested in addressing a number of those elements that aren't explicitly addressed by Living Building Challenge. We'll probably, including like electromagnetics and so forth.
Right.
So that's it. So maybe let's move for a few minutes into some of the practical ideas that people can look at.
Okay.
And one of the things I will introduce a concept here called hormesis, or hormesis. And it has a lot to do with how we should design our technologies so they do not create chronic stress, but they actually are designed to allow us and the environment to be healthy. So it turns out that, first I'll say that chronic stresses are always harmful.
Right.
Chronic stressors would be defined as a stress that's always there that you never get a break from. So any chronic stress really will be harmful after a period of time. It goes into the harmful dose. But it turns out that biological systems, the way they operate, is that they notice what challenges that they are receiving, and they respond to that. Probably the one people have the best intuitive sense for is like if you go and you work out, you lift weights or whatever, you know that what you're doing is you're challenging your muscles. You're actually giving them a stressor.
Right. Yes.
And so as the diagram here is pointing out, there is a low level stress that has no benefit. You don't actually create enough of a dose that you start to get a benefit out of it. But if you get to a certain place, what happens is the stressor starts to become a beneficial dose, and the benefit you get from it goes up. And so if you go to a personal trainer, they're going to try to figure out what the beneficial dose is for you, what we call on this picture the sweet spot. And then they're going to try to help you sort of work to that point and then stop and have recovery time. And if they do that, then you're going to see that your body responds by getting stronger and building more muscle. And of course, you could continue to work past that sweet spot. What will happen is, literally, you'll kind of get to the point where you're putting too much stress. You'll get diminishing returns, and then eventually, if you keep on, you get to the point where you get a harmful dose. We call that overworking, right? It's you've worked out way too much. And what will happen is you keep on doing that, instead of getting stronger, your body will actually get weaker and so forth. So we want to figure what we call this hormesis response. We want to find out how to, when we work out, hit a sweet spot and then recover. But this response, you'll find it all over the place. For example, if you live in a building all the time that's held at exactly, say, 72 degrees Fahrenheit or 74 degrees Fahrenheit, 50% humidity, the thermoregulatory capability of your body will atrophy. It's never challenged.
Right.
And as a result, you go outside and all of a sudden, your body can't handle 60 degrees or 85 degrees. You're uncomfortable. But it turns out human beings are designed to be comfortable in a pretty broad range of environments. And we're actually healthier when we get exposed to a broader range of environments.
Interesting.
So same thing with wind. If you always are inside and never exposed to wind, you go outside for a little while, people will get fatigued being exposed to wind for a few minutes.
Mm.
But if you're outside and exposed to different levels of wind, when the wind goes up and down, your body will acclimatize to that, and will get to the point where it can work with that really, really well. And so what we need to do is we need to think about how to design technologies so that they provide a balance of three things. And I've decided in biocompatible design to call them static comfort, dynamic comfort, and appropriate challenge.
Okay.
So static comfort would be what happens, well, it's what buildings have basically been designed to try to give us. It's a kind of comfortableness that provides no challenge or stressor whatsoever. You try to make everything soft and comfortable. You make certain that the environment is completely neutral. You feel absolutely no amount of coolness or warmth. It's just neutral, everything, right? No wind, nothing changing. That is static comfort, and we do need a certain amount of that. That's where we can rest and recover.
Okay.
And so we need that, especially if we're feeling sick or run down or whatever. We need access to static comfort. Sleeping in static comfort is very nice.
Mm.
Maybe a little on the cool side if you sleep hot, that sort of thing. A tiny bit adjusted to what you need as a human being. But then there's another thing that I like to call dynamic comfort. And that's like, being outside on one of those really wonderful days in which the sun is coming down on you and there's a little breeze and it's a little cool. And it's, there's actually all these things that aren't neutral. They're providing a little challenge and a little bit of stress and stimulation to your body, but they feel really good. Mm. It feels good if you are healthy to be outside and to have that cool breeze, or to have that warm sun, or to have those things, or to even get out and move around and walk, or maybe even run a little bit, to stretch your legs through a little run through the forest, whatever. These things are kind of dynamic comfort, and we need those in balance to be healthy as human beings. And then occasionally we need what I call appropriate challenge. What I mean by appropriate is according to your age and health and so forth. Everybody has a different level at which we would call it an appropriate challenge. And that would be something that takes them up to maybe 80% or so of capacity.
Okay.
Because human beings, the way our bodies are designed, is if we don't actually kind of push ourselves up towards our limits occasionally, our body will say, well, they're not using that. We don't have to have it. And then all of a sudden, those capabilities start to atrophy.
Right. So I guess most people spend most of their working day in static comfort.
Yes.
Just sitting. The lights are always the same.
Yes.
Probably the temperature. They don't have to, feel the wind, because probably the windows don't even open.
Exactly.
They don't feel the temperature fluctuations.
Right.
If they were outside. So, and that just diminishes our own health.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is I'm now having discussions with architects who are wanting to have this conversation. They're wanting to think about how we can take something like an office building or a school, and instead of just thinking about how to create static comfort, how do we make the buildings dynamic? So they open up, they allow for sunlight, they allow for breezes and wind, they allow for fluctuations in temperature and humidity, so that, but can still be sort of, controlled when the weather gets to be extreme. When it gets to be extremely hot, they can still maintain a certain level of coolness. When it gets extremely cold, they can provide a certain amount of shelter, but still allow for us to have this dynamic comfort and provide spaces in which people can go out and create an appropriate challenge for themselves.
Right.
And so I intentionally put a picture here of a person out in a natural environment, because we've even got to that point where now we go to a gym and we go inside to a particularly controlled environment, and we have this thing called, a working out, in which we go in and we have a personal trainer or whatever, and we lift weights, we do these artificial things, which can be great. But it's like, wouldn't it be nice if some of our appropriate challenge came from interacting in a dynamic way with the world around us?
It would. It might be.
So what if we thought about creating the infrastructure of civilization so we had access to all these things?
That would be wonderful. Have you planned a new civilization?
Yes.
Fantastic.
And so this all comes under what I call bioappropriate external stimulation. Remember I mentioned that as one of the principles? Mm-hmm. Under that, the guidelines for designers say you need to provide access to static comfort, dynamic comfort, and appropriate challenge.
Right.
Right? So, yeah. How do we do that? Well, we create spaces that are walkable and where it's natural to go outside. If we create mixed-use spaces in civilization where people can get out and walk from place to place, all of a sudden, instead of being in a car culture where all your movement is in a car. And by the way, how many times do you get to stop and chat with your neighbors when you're driving around in the car?
Not very often.
Not very often. When you are in a mixed-use, walkable neighborhood, the availability of talking to people, running into neighbors and so forth goes way up. This is what is under the design principle of provide the surface area for human connection.
Okay. Right.
This is another way. Mixed use, walkable, bikeable neighborhoods, they all move in that direction of creating surface area for human connection, because people are moving more at human scale speed.
Right. Instead of everything being set up for cars,
Exactly.
not pedestrians.
Yes. And what we know is that people who are in, we now have really good peer-reviewed science that shows people who are in more walkable communities that are less car-centric are more healthy, have lower incidences of depression, lower incidence of obesity, and so forth. And they feel less isolated when you
Right.
look at them and look at those communities and sort of work with people. They self-report being less isolated. So this also provides more access to dynamic comfort, to being, well, another of the principles under human factors is design for movement and engagement. And so instead of like getting up out of, off of your chair, walking to your car, sitting in your car, driving, walking into an office and sitting again, if we think about it, we can create environments, even office environments and living spaces that are much more dynamic spaces where you're encouraged to move and change position instead of sitting statically in a chair for hours on end.
Yeah.
We can create spaces that encourage you to change posture and move around and so forth and have that engagement and movement. And they're designed so that people of all sensory modalities and different capabilities are engaged.
Mm.
So that's an important element. Another thing that's interesting to me is that buildings and neighborhoods, they can either encourage or discourage people from going outdoors.
That's interesting. Discouraging.
Just the way you build a building. For example, the picture I'm showing here in the lower right-hand corner of this is an example of an architectural design that creates a huge barrier for people going in and out of the building. And so there's not a protected overhang here. So the transition from in and out of the building is very abrupt.
Right.
People feel much better about going in and out of a building when there's a protected transitional space, like a porch that has an overhang that allows for some transition. The second thing we know is that if you have a lot of steps up or down, that it makes more of a psychological barrier between indoors and outdoors.
Oh.
So you'll notice that here, you go out this door, and if you don't look, you're almost going to trip down those stairs. You don't have a landing or anything to make you feel comfortable stepping out the door and closing the door. Think about what you have to do here to actually go out that door and close it. You'd have to go out and step down a step and turn around and close the door.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And the other thing is, if this was on, say, the poleward side of the building, that is away from the sun, then it's going to be in shadow. And transitioning to a shadowy space also discourages people from going in and out.
Right.
So you could take and create buildings in which there's a level walkout, maybe with a little gentle slope down away from the building, with a transitional space into a nice sunny area.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, if you design all that properly and you think about what you're doing, you can create a space in which it feels like the wall of separation between indoors and outdoors is much more diffuse.
That sounds lovely.
And you feel encouraged to move in and out of the building,
yes.
Right?
Mm.
Richard Louv was looking at, he was the person who coined the phrase nature deficit disorder for children. And he looked at it and said, there's virtually no place for children to play in our communities anymore.
Mm.
In a lot of places, it's almost illegal for them to be outdoors.
And parents worry about their safety.
They do. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that we've created neighborhoods that are so isolating.
Right.
People don't know their neighbors.
Mm-mm.
They don't feel safe with their children being out. I remember as I was growing up, I knew all my neighbors. I knew all their kids, and we would all go back and forth. And my parents knew all of the other parents in the neighborhood. And there was a great feeling that we could all just run around and play.
Mm.
And what's interesting is statistically now, children are safer today from things like abduction and so forth than they were 20, 30 years ago. But we've had so much media try to convince us that if we let a child out of our sight, that they're going to be kidnapped. It's like, you turned around and they were going to be, because what we do is, if it happens anywhere in the developed world, it becomes national, international news, and therefore we have this biased view that children, if you don't keep it, if you give them any ability to be what we call free-range children, right? A free-range child go out and play and explore and have time on their own and so forth, which, by the way, is critically important to children developing their own sense of self, their own ability to self-regulate, to be emotionally self-regulatory, it's just critically important for childhood development.
It is. That's key, that it has to be unsupervised.
Yes. Yeah. So, if we don't have that, then we failed as designers. And so we've just created spaces that are so isolating that people don't know their neighbors, and therefore it's kind of like the follow-on to that is that children are like, oh, you can't go any further than I can see. I've got to be able to see you, and we'll put a big tall fence around the backyard, and then you can only go there where I can watch you out the kitchen window. So yes,
and that also went back to what you said about stories we tell ourselves. So
yes.
They're actually safer now, but that's not the story we're telling them.
Story, because just straight up, the news media realizes that there was an old saying in the news media that if it bleeds, it leads.
Yes.
Which was, that it's really good for ratings, because if you can create a scary story like that, you can lead with a headline like, parents, you need to hear this. Your child isn't safe. And all of a sudden, every conscientious parent is like, oh, I've got to watch. And it is a psychological manipulation. And it is basically taking and corrupting storytelling for the purposes of revenue. Getting more viewers and therefore creating more revenue.
That's true.
It's basically misuse of storytelling.
And then that has a huge impact, because as you said, that's nature connection for children is critical for their emotional development. And the rates of like mental health these days, especially in young people, is astonishingly high.
Absolutely. Yes.
So we need to get back to this. We need a neighborhood that has spaces like in this picture. Yes.
So we'll kind of move on through the rest of these maybe a little more quickly. Yep, neighborhoods absolutely need green spaces, wild spaces people can get into. In the mixed land use requirement under Biocompatible Design, we're setting a goal for how many minutes walk everybody should be from a wild space.
Fantastic.
So everybody should have adjacency to green space, and they should be within a couple minutes walk of wild space.
Couple minutes?
Yes.
Okay.
It's absolutely doable. I don't have time to get into it here, but we now have prototype communities in which it's been shown that we can absolutely do this and maintain the density of population that we need.
Okay.
So yeah, we can do it, and there's a whole wonderful set of teachings and lecture on that, but it's absolutely possible, right? Yes. We need to design these community spaces to create environments that are low stress and time rich. People to get away from any chronic stressors, and also to think about how to make certain that even in the highly built part of our environment that we don't have chronic stress.
True.
We know that when you can hear bird song, and see natural shapes,
See a
trees,
tree. Yeah.
so forth, that stress response goes way down very quickly.
There was that famous study done in a hospital where the patients who could see a tree healed faster and went home quicker. And that was years and years ago.
Yes, absolutely. You know, I'm having conversations with some oncology nurses right now about designing spaces for cancer patients around the same principles.
Oh, great.
You know, how do we take and create an oncology center that uses these principles to help speed up and work with the healing that's being done by, you know, the oncology center.
Right.
I mean, these are important ideas we need to be exploring, because absolutely these kinds of things make a large difference to the outcomes.
Absolutely.
Yes. To me, I think every community should have some local food production.
Me too.
Part of that is that it is a reason to get people outdoors. It gets their hands in the dirt. It allows for a certain amount of local food sovereignty.
Yes.
And it allows for nutrient-dense food to be grown.
Exactly. I think food should be grown in public spaces.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
People see it, they can pick it, eat it fresh. Because once you taste food like that, you never go back to the supermarket.
Exactly.
Tasteless.
This particular slide I pulled over from a presentation I first did on ecological solar design, where I'm teaching people how to do renewable energy. And when I do that class, I point out to everybody that solar technology is an awful lot more than just solar panels.
Okay.
Electrical. To me, what I call the highest form of solar power is a garden.
I love that.
Right? Because if you think, and I go through and as a technologist, I compare the technological elegance of a garden versus the technological, crude technological nature of solar panels.
Okay.
And to me, and when I list out for technologies, you know, technology experts, the attributes of a garden and how it uses solar power versus how our solar electrical systems use solar power, nobody has ever been able to argue with me that our solar power is anything other than fairly primitive compared to a garden.
Right.
Yeah.
That's so true.
And so my challenge to the folks that are creating our technology is, can we think about how amazing these systems, like just something like a garden is, and create technologies that are more biomimetic. That is, they mimic the ecological functioning of wild and natural ecosystems. Right?
Yes.
So, you know, we talked about before mixed-use neighborhoods. They encourage walking, biking, other physical activity. They support the kind of activity that keeps people actually much more physically healthy as well. And we don't need to do that just in our urban centers, which we've had a lot of thought on how to make urban centers more mixed use. We have to go back and retrofit our suburbs as well. Because right now, suburbs were actually designed to require cars.
Yes.
And they were actually mindfully designed to create cars in order to create consumption. That's a whole story. There's a whole history of that. It's going to take some work to retrofit suburbs to make them more walkable.
That's what I was going to ask. Do we need to just like level neighborhoods and start over? Or can we adapt them?
James Howard Kunstler called suburbs the largest misallocation of natural resources in the history of human civilization.
Oh, goodness.
And he may very well be right, but I think there are ways of retrofitting. And, you know, and of course, the thing is that we've gone in, and most of our suburbs are designed with a finite design lifetime anyway. Most of the buildings in our suburbs, after about 30 to 40 years, are really in poor shape. And so we're probably going to end up taking and replacing them. And we need to replace them with fundamentally biocompatible buildings and reorganize the usages of our suburban. And we need to actually give a lot of our spaces of suburbs back to food production and wild spaces by changing the land use footprint of suburbs.
Okay.
What you find out is that, okay, well, let's use the example of the agrihood, Serenbe agrihood outside of Atlanta, Georgia. They built their agrihood at the same population density per acre as normal subdivision development. However, 70% of the landscape is left in green and wild spaces.
Wow.
They did that by creating more intensive use of space where the buildings are, but the buildings are designed and put on path and road systems such that everybody, all residents, can walk out their back door and be in wild space within a minute or two.
Wow.
And they're putting on, like, the 1,200 acres that they're on, they're putting the same number of people that you would put in 1,200 acres of subdivision.
Okay.
But leaving 70+% of it in green and wild space.
Sounds amazing.
The quality of life is way higher, way, way higher. And it's, you can go and look and see what it's done to the community structure. It's walkable, it's mixed use, and children are actually outside playing.
Wow.
It gives them places to play where the parents feel safe. So yes, we can do this. There are actually models on the ground today of how we do this. We need to continue. There are, if you go and talk to the Nigrans and so forth who are the founders of Serenbe, they'll absolutely tell you that they didn't get to do everything they wanted to do because they had to fight with zoning and regulations and so forth. They've had to fight a lot just to be allowed to do it right. So there's a lot of work to be done to get zoning and regulation and so forth to allow us to do what we know we need to do.
Right. Everybody needs to embed your 21 principles.
Yes. If we do that, it's going to require some zoning changes and regulatory changes and so forth. But if we engage the professional designers, they're the ones that can get those changes made.
Okay.
Right? So a couple other things that are maybe a little more close to home is sunlight. You know, I'm working on a natural building design right now where we are using light tubes and windows to create a situation in which we'll basically try to have no artificial lights during daylight hours at all.
Wow.
And beautiful, equally equal lighting coming from multiple directions. If you just put windows on one wall and that's the only natural light you have coming in, it creates glare.
Right.
Harsh lighting environment. There's a lot of light coming from one place, and then there's and the room I'm in unfortunately only has light coming from one direction. So I've had to supplement with a little artificial light from that direction, just so that there's not harshness, right? And so natural light coming from this way and artificial light coming from that way, I'm having to do artificial light because the room I'm in right now doesn't have that. But if we think about it, we can create beautiful rooms that are lit and provide that broad spectrum light that's very healthy for us.
Right.
Right. And then we also need to give ourselves access to darkness at night. We need not have light pollution. We need to be able to go outside and see the stars because that's a critical part. Being able to have access to darkness, being able to sleep in rooms that don't have light pollution. This is critically important to our health as well, that we have our circadian rhythms be able to function. And as we go into the evening time, our houses support lowering light levels and shifting out of the blue light so that we can downshift and be ready to sleep. These are all things that are part of making design truly biocompatible. It is compatible with our circadian rhythms and our cycles of life, making certain that wildlife outside can also follow its patterns, that nocturnal animals have their time and space to do what they need to do, right?
Mm. Yeah, I noticed your glasses have a blue tint.
They do.
Can you tell us about those?
Sure. And that's because I end up having to work on computers and screens a lot. And a lot of them, you can take, there's now finally getting software where you can shift the color palette on your computer to where it has less blue light.
Yes.
The problem is I do desktop publishing and video work and so forth, so I've got to be able to kind of see the real color. So during the day, I have to leave it, set that way. And so this is an anti-glare that I have put on my glasses that also tends to filter out certain of the extreme parts of the blue spectrum that can create eye strain if you have to look at a computer all day.
Okay.
And so I do that just to kind of help keep that off my eyes. But
yeah, you can get those, the software that as the sun, it tracks where you are, and as the sun's going down, it takes more blue out.
Exactly. And we need to, the building lighting needs to also shift.
Yes.
And I tend to like to shift away to a light that has less blue in it, and it's also lower down, so I don't have this broad spectrum hitting my whole body. And when you do that, especially your face has a lot of those receptors. If you have a lot of light, harsh light hitting your face, then your body does not downshift. It's part of the one reason people have a hard time going to sleep. Certain people are more sensitive than others, but I've had a lot of people who will tell me that they're having trouble getting to sleep. We adjust their light cycle around day-night.
Right.
So we're organizing their sleep around day-night, and also their light cycle, artificial light around that. And all of a sudden, they realize that their body is downshifting. They're getting ready for bed. If they're very sensitive, we tell them, try not to have any screen time an hour before you go to bed.
Right.
And what will happen is they're realizing, oh, look, I can now turn off my lights. I have a room that we've made certain is dark enough. And I have allowed my body to transition down, and now I'm going to sleep immediately instead of laying in bed for an hour, not able to go to sleep.
Right, because they've been producing that melatonin.
Right.
As things, dimmed.
It's important to note different people have different levels of sensitivity.
Yes.
Some people are very sensitive. Other people seem to not be bothered by it as much. So every person just has to figure it out for themselves. What is your body? How does it react? Some people, I'm not quite as bothered by it as a lot of people are, but it does still have an effect. Some people are extremely sensitive.
I'm extremely sensitive.
Yes. All right. Another little thought is just noise pollution. All I'll say is for this one is that chronic noise pollution is a chronic stressor, and it creates chronic low-level stress that's very harmful. And so we need to think about how to create environments that don't have chronic noise pollution. So there are hard noise pollution limits in the biocompatible design standards for that reason.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Literally how many decibels of different kinds of noise pollution you are allowed to create. And there's also an idea called an ecological soundscape. And it is that there are certain natural sounds that actually reduce stress.
Oh.
For example, birds in a baseline behavior, singing and doing that sort of thing, actually reduce stress. And it's a really interesting set of stories why that's the case. I don't have time to get into all of it right now, but running water, the sound of running water reduces stress. And we believe that this is partly because birdsong was a state in nature that told you that there were no big predators around.
Right.
Because the birds are relaxed and singing. And running water is, well, before we polluted a lot of our water bodies, almost all running water was a source of good drinking water.
Right.
So it was a resource that we needed. So if you were sitting by a nice flowing stream with birds singing around you, well, okay, I don't have any predators around me right now, and I have water I can drink when I need it. Aha! And it's a de-stressing thing, and so an ecological soundscape basically acknowledges there's certain natural sounds that are de-stressing, and there are certain other sounds that create stress.
Right.
So we can do things like design office spaces to have sounds of running water and so forth, to even the sound of running water to sort of mute out conversations happening in other parts of the office that would subconsciously distract us and so forth. We can create ecological soundscapes that way.
That's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's something probably most people haven't thought of.
Makes it, and the whole thing is, any one of these things, if you're exposed to it just like a minute or two, you can handle that. But what if you're in it 8 hours a day, every day?
Right.
Or what if it's in your home? What if it's the background environment of your home?
Yeah.
What happens then? And so ecological lightscape, ecological soundscape, these become critical for long-term health because they can become chronic stressors.
Mm.
Another chronic stressor, chemicals.
Yes.
And I'm kind of curious if you have anybody else in the summit that's going to be talking about anything having to do with chemical exposure or whatever.
No.
Oh boy, I'll just, this again, we could probably spend an hour just on this one topic. But what I would say is that we have tens of thousands of new chemicals that are synthetic that are introduced into our environment. We really don't know what all of them do. There is no, in the United States especially, where I am, there is, the precautionary principle is not followed.
No.
The precautionary principle basically says, when you're doing something brand new, like creating a brand new synthetic chemical that can get people into people's bodies, then you need to basically assume that it's guilty until proven innocent. You need to say, wow, we don't know what this is capable of doing, and therefore there are unknown risks. And proper risk management says that we don't just throw it out there and expose everybody to it until we know what it does. And that's called the precautionary principle. Fortunately, there are parts of Europe that are actually doing a lot more that is closer to the precautionary principle. They have better regulations so that people can't just invent a new synthetic chemical and throw it out there. Not perfect by any means, but Europe is been much more progressive in adopting the precautionary principle. Here in the US, no. People can, and companies can invent synthetic chemicals and throw them out there with very, very little oversight. And what we now know is that even some of these chemicals by themselves are creating all kinds of very, very poor outcomes. But what we also don't know is what happens when you combine chemical A with chemical B.
Right.
What can happen is you can get results that were not anticipated at all, because there can be a chemical reaction and can create a whole new compound.
Right. Oh gosh.
And it can get even more complicated. It's like, well, okay, chemical A and chemical B meet in the presence of chemical C, and chemical C catalyzes a reaction between A and B and creates a compound that's now toxic.
Mm.
And it's like when you have 20,000, 30,000 chemical compounds flying around in your environment, how do you even start to do that analysis?
Mm.
And so we have created a toxic brew of chemicals, and biocompatible design says we got to stop that.
Yes.
Especially now because we're finding some of these chemicals in fat in seals in the Arctic. And things like microplastics and nanoplastics, tiny, tiny particles of plastic that basically are the result of the degradation of plastics that get into the environment. We're now finding that you can find these things on the tops of the most pristine mountains in the middle of the Rocky Mountain Range or in the Alps, because they're so small and light now that they're being picked up by the wind and carried hundreds and thousands of miles and being deposited in what we used to think of as pristine environments. So you literally can't get away from it anymore.
No.
And so we've really got to start to use an approach of biocompatible materials and processes.
Yes.
So what I would just say is, if you aren't already thinking carefully about all of the chemicals that you use in your household, and especially on your body and on your skin,
Right.
then I would highly advise that you think about those first, because especially the things you put into your body, your food, makeup, self-care products, soap, shampoo, toothpaste, deodorants, those sorts of things, all of those things, there are so many of those that are so toxic. So we really need to think about that.
Yeah.
And that's a great place to start. Just get the toxic stuff out of your own house.
Yes.
Do a toxic chemical clean out.
Good idea.
I find it interesting, by the way, that here in the US, we have household chemicals that you are supposed to buy and use to clean your house. But if you decide that you want to dispose of them before you use them all up, you're not supposed to throw them away. You're supposed to actually take them to the hazardous material center here, where they have a center which will accept hazardous materials.
Oh my goodness.
And so I'm like, think about this for a minute. You go to the store and buy this chemical thing that's so harsh. You're supposed to like clean your bathroom where you and your children are going to be cleaning your bodies. You're supposed to put this all over that. And it's so toxic that if you don't use it all up, that you're not supposed to throw it in the trash can because it's too toxic for that to go in a landfill.
Amazing. And how many people actually take the leftover chemical to the hazardous waste center to be disposed of safely?
Exactly. Yeah, crazy. Yeah, to me, it's just completely crazy. And then the last thing I'll kind of mention is, and this is another thing we could talk about for a long time, which is the electromagnetic environment. This is still very controversial. You know, I am an electrical engineer. I have a lot of background in radio frequency, which is RF, radio frequency, electromagnetic fields. Both, you know, what are the ELF, the extremely low frequency fields that are created by power systems, 50 hertz and 60 hertz and so forth, and also the high frequency stuff, the RF range and so on. There's been a lot of debate, discussion about whether any of these things have bioactive effects. How do they affect all living organisms? Well, there's been a lot of claims about the biological effects of electromagnetic fields. Everything from maybe they produce cancer, maybe they interact with the nervous system. I mean, I have a whole list here of things from a list I found from one group that was researching this. What I've noticed as I've done research, and by the way, I do a lot of stuff that is very research based. I use a tool called Zotero, which is what's called a reference management tool. And anybody who's doing this professionally, I recommend doing this. It allows for me to take, and when I find peer-reviewed science, I can grab a hold of that and put it into where I can save all of it, and it saves all of the bibliographic information, right? Oh. So I can go back when I'm writing about this and then provide all of the peer-reviewed science that backs up what we're talking about. And so I'm trying to review all the peer-reviewed science about this. And what I'm noticing is that one of the reasons people are starting to not trust peer-reviewed science so much is because there's a lot of, quote, peer-reviewed science for sale right now.
Oh, yes.
Corporations that want, they have billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar interests in their product not being a problem. Like, you know, genetically modified organisms not being a problem, electromagnetic fields not being a problem. They are funding a lot of research that is specifically designed not to find the problem.
Right.
Then when people come back and ask these questions, they're basically saying, oh, you're one of those, you know, people who don't believe in science, because here's all this peer-reviewed research that says that there's no problem. And then you come along and other people come along and say, but wait, there are these other studies over here that say it is a problem. And it turns out to be interesting. All of the science that you funded says there's no problem. But pretty much all the science over here that was independently funded says there is a problem. So I've gotten to the point of saying that, to me, all scientists should be required to clearly state the funding upon which their research is based.
You would think they already would have to do that.
Yes, because it's a fundamental conflict of interest.
Conflict of interest, yeah.
When you are, I mean, and these are like universities and so forth. Now what's happening is a lot of universities, a lot of their research is being done and funded by industry. So just because you see a set of research that says it was done by such and such a university or whatever, don't assume that it is unbiased.
Mm.
It may very well have been an industry-funded bit of research. You have to go back and find out who funded it.
Yeah.
And then also, of course, this is the other problem. You have to go in and read the paper and find out their methodologies. And what you find, and I'm working with people that are working on biocompatible design with me who have that depth of capability. They can go in, pull down the research, read it, look at methodology, and come back and go, this was designed not to find a problem.
Right.
You know, it's like, oh, well, we're going to look at the long-term, the effects of genetically modified organisms. Well, okay, you only looked at their effects for this many days.
Mm.
You know, you did not look at the long-term effects of that. And what you start finding is that the research that found problems went on for longer. And in some cases, multi-generational. It started finding problems in the offspring of the mice that were being used and fed a particularly genetically modified feed, right? That their offspring have problems and so on and so forth. Then what happens is these companies go off then and fund attacks on researchers that find problems, which is absolutely, I've seen that over, and I've talked to many researchers where that has happened to them. They find a problem, and tier one response is that these companies fund other people to come along and attack their research. And number two is if they gain too much credibility, they come along and try to destroy their career.
Yes.
And I wish I could say that that was all conspiracy theory and so forth. Unfortunately, I've seen it happen in too many places, too many people, in too many different fields. So understand that it does happen. And it's not surprising that it happens when you realize that there are companies making tens and hundreds of billions of dollars of revenue on these chemicals and products and processes and so on and so forth.
Right.
So I'm afraid it's what's happening is science itself is going to run into a crisis of credibility. And if it doesn't address, what we're already seeing is a lot of people are starting to go, I don't believe that. It doesn't make sense. My intuitive sense tells me that can't possibly be right. And not only that, all of the anecdotal evidence that I see around me contradicts what they're telling me.
Mm.
Right. So last thing I'll say about electromagnetic fields. Yes, I have quite a bit of expertise in it, and have worked with it for about 30 years. What I would say is that one of the biocompatible design standards is limiting and minimizing electromagnetic fields. I am convinced that there are effects from it.
What about 5G?
Oh boy, now you want me to go talk for another hour.
No, just what, is it good or bad?
Okay, so let me talk about 5G for just a minute. And there are entire summits out there that have talked about 5G. I can talk about it for just a minute. And the reason people are concerned about 5G is that it is opening up a whole new band of frequencies with the 5G new radio technology. Higher frequencies up into the high gigahertz range, and 30 gigahertz, 60 gigahertz, even up above that. And because these frequencies they don't travel very far because they're absorbed by humidity in the air. They can't travel through things like building walls very effectively. What they're doing is they're pumping up the power pretty high, and they're putting these base station points very, very densely, right? And they're doing some beam forming so that the if you're holding onto a phone, that it's pushing a lot of power in your direction and so forth. We don't fully understand what all this does. We do know that there is research coming out that basically asks a lot of questions.
Right.
For example, there was a university study that came out, independently funded, that showed that when you get into the around 70 gigahertz and above range, there is a range of frequencies that they're looking at starting using here pretty soon, where the wavelength is exactly right, that when it hits the human body, the pores in your sweat glands are the right size, that they act like little miniature waveguides to accept in that radiation and have it go in and hit the moisture at the base of the sweat gland.
Oh my goodness.
So our body basically is an array of antennae for absorbing in this radiation. We don't know what that does. So what we're basically doing, this is again, precautionary principle, right? Precautionary principle would say, let's not deploy that to affect millions and millions of people until we have done some robust work to understand what the long-term effect of that is.
Yeah.
What we have done instead is we've gone, well, we basically have said nobody has yet proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that it is harmful. Therefore, we should be allowed to do it until somebody proves that it's causing these problems. But I did put on the bottom of my slide, why does it feel more restful in areas without all of the EM electromagnetic soup?
Yeah. Is there anything we can do to protect ourselves?
What I would say is, inside of your own house, try to minimize the amount of electromagnetic fields.
Okay.
If you can do without Wi-Fi in your house, do so. I try to run as much as possible in the house wired instead of wireless.
Okay.
I do try to, when I'm using computers like this, I set them up so that I'm as exposed to the least amount of electromagnetic field I possibly can be. I have large monitors I put a little farther away from me instead of smaller monitors close up. Right here, as we were talking about at the very beginning before we started the call or the recording, I have a grounding mat right here in front of my keyboard. And as I'm working, my hands are always resting on this grounding pad. And what that does is it grounds out my body, and it provides a degree of reduction in what's called the body voltage. All these electromagnetic fields, they actually induce an AC voltage on our body. And I've measured some people in a home office setup like this, where their body voltage was measured at like 28 volts,
Goodness.
which is crazy. Our target voltage should be like less than 0.1 volts.
Oh my goodness.
Of induced body voltage, right? And what happened was they had equipment that wasn't properly grounded, and it was creating huge electromagnetic fields. It was inducing voltage on their body, and they were ungrounded. So
Wow.
I very carefully set everything up, make certain it's properly grounded, make certain that I have a mat here where I'm grounded, and try to minimize electromagnetic fields here in my house. I do try to make certain that when I am not actively using a smartphone, that it is not close to me.
Mm.
They try to minimize transmission because they're trying to minimize battery usage. But they do, especially if you have them turn on Wi-Fi, they're constantly chattering.
Mm.
And so I just keep the cell phone away from me, and typically at least like 5 feet or more away from me when I am sitting and working. And I try to, especially when I sleep, I try to provide the most electromagnetic clean environment I can.
Mm. And can you get those grounding mats anywhere? Are they?
You can. I'm not going to recommend a particular vendor, but I will just say that if you go do a little research, you'll find that there are people out there selling the different grounding mats for different applications. You can also get systems that help you ground out when you sleep.
Oh, okay. Like what?
So like a grounding sheet that goes in, and you put it over your base sheet, your contour sheet when you sleep.
Oh, okay.
And you run it outdoors to a grounding mat. This is one of those places where there's been some very interesting research about grounding out and the biological effects of being grounded. And I'm hoping that we get more good research on that. The research I've seen so far is very interesting and somewhat promising. It shows that there may very well be some reduction in inflammation in the body when you're grounded out and so forth. And I remember I'm an electrical engineer, so in the very beginning I was very skeptical on this.
Right.
I was like, this sounds like somebody, doing some sort of
Meditation or
pseudoscience-y kind of thing. I can sell you this groundy stuff and whatever. And so I was very skeptical. I mean, in the very, very beginning, I was very skeptical of the electromagnetics because I hadn't seen any research that showed that it interacted with biological systems. And then I started seeing more and more, and then the more I worked with it, the more I started realizing that there are people who actually really are affected by it, and that you can feel the difference when you have been in an area which has a lot of electromagnetic soup in it versus when you're in an area without it. And then also same thing for grounding. I was like, in the beginning, I was thinking, oh, this is another pseudoscience-y kind of thing. I would like to see a lot more science on it.
Mm.
I have seen some places where research has been done where they've taken people and they've done a double blind where they've grounded them out and then done infrared thermography on them to see whether inflammation in the body was going down.
Wow.
And the best ones, what they do is they basically tell them, they say, we're gonna have you connected to this grounding mat. And they don't know whether the grounding mat is actually grounded or not.
Oh,
right? You do a double blind experiment and you see if there is a statistic. So the grounding mat without being physically grounded is your placebo, and it's your control group. And then you go off and you have this grounding mat is actually grounded. Let's see if there is a significant difference in results between the two. And some of the early results show that, yeah, there seems to be differences when you do that. And to some degree, I can start to make sense of it because human beings are bioelectric beings.
Right.
You know, we are, our nervous system and a lot of things going on inside of us are electrical, they're bioelectrical. And when you have voltage, you have an excess of, ions built up on the body. And they're measurable. I can measure those with scientific equipment. And when I ground out the body, it actually allows for that excess to be neutralized.
Mm.
And so there's now some theories about why biologically this would be bioactive. I would say from reading it that we're not there yet in fully understanding it. But there seems to be something going on there, and I would love to see a lot more research into it. So in the meanwhile, what I can tell you is grounding out does not, it's not going to cause any problems, and it seems to, we know that it also seems to help when you have to be in an electromagnetically charged environment. So I can measure that. So I choose to do it as I'm waiting for better science and deeper results. And also, that means one of the biocompatible design principles is controlled EM and grounding environment.
Mm.
So there we go. I think that was all my slides. As we're wrapping it up, what I'll say is, as I said in the beginning, we are really just now in the beginning of the peer review process. I am about to, as we're recording this, start in about 2 weeks with a group of other permaculture designers, architects, engineers, scientists, medical professionals, to go through these 21 principles and all the design guidelines and try to begin to make certain that they are dialed in.
Right.
That they are, I'm calling this a systems level review, right? Do I have the right 21 principles? Are they organized the right way? Have we covered everything that's critical? So I'm trying to get what I call the minimum set. It's like, I don't want 500 principles. Nobody can follow all of that. We want to refine it down to a concise set of principles that I can then hand off to the people who are designing our technologies and our infrastructure, and get them to be thinking about this. So as we're doing this, I'm just now starting to create a website for biocompatible design that will eventually be up. What I do have right now is a Facebook page for biocompatible design.
Okay.
And what I'm going to do is, as we go forward, I'm going to be basically posting updates on the Biocompatible Design Facebook page, and so forth. And there also is a closed working group on Facebook for all of the reviewers. So that's a closed group. If you search around, you might see that, but it's a closed group where I'm inviting all of the reviewers, and we're using that as a part of the discussion forum to discuss all of this. But the page is open, and so if anybody is interested in like what's going on with biocompatible design and so forth, go find the page and maybe follow the page or like the page, and I'll try to be providing updates on that, little news updates as we go. And I'm hoping that by sometime into 2020, we'll be able to get the first book out the door. The first book is going to be called Biocompatible Design, Principles and Patterns for Regenerative Technology.
Wow.
And it's going to outline the 21 principles and the guidelines and give some background. And it's going to be kind of the big picture of it. And it's going to be hopefully to start the conversation around biocompatible design. And the goal is to eventually come up with a second book called The Handbook of Biocompatible Design. It's sort of like a technical deep dive for the professional designers that need to actually really do it.
Wow, Alan, this has just been so amazing. You have so much knowledge and wisdom, and I know we could go on for hours. It's just been fascinating. But thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed it. And if someone wants to connect with you on your current website, what is that website?
So what we're doing right now is we are rebranding into the Institute of Integrated Regenerative Design. And the reason for that is I had been working under, I won't even give you the name right now, I've been working under something that was designed to be more of a bioregional. And as I started working on this, it became very obvious that there was a lot of engagement here nationally and internationally. And so I am rebranding as the Institute of Integrated Regenerative Design. And hopefully I'll have that website up here pretty soon. You can either go to integratedregenerativedesign.com or i2rd.co.
Okay, I'll put the links.
Yes.
The Facebook, I'll put the links on the page. So they'll be under the video or next to the video if anyone wants to go deeper.
Yeah, so I squared RD, right? I2RD, Institute of Integrated Regenerative Design.co. It's going to be the short form that'll get you there as well. And now, if we have so much work to do, I don't know if we'll have that website fully live by the time this plays. I'm right in the middle of all this biocompatible design peer review, and as a result, websites are a little lower priority. We're trying to work it right now, but that website will be coming. So if
we'll look for it.
If you go to if you go to the Biocompatible Design Facebook page, I'll make certain that we get you there from there once we have everything going.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for your time and everything you've shared. It's just been wonderful. Thank you so very much.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you so much for having me. And I know that the summit's going to have just a huge amount of wonderful information for everybody. So thank you so much for hosting. And yeah, I'll be looking forward to getting to see all the other wonderful guests that you're going to be sharing with.
Thank you.